Recollection Road is proud to partner with LEGACYBOX. Get early access to the best deal of the year. Watch until the end of this video to see why LEGACYBOX is the perfect gift this holiday season. And then 1921 was the beginning of what became known as the Roaring Twenties, and the U.S. had grown to around 108 million people. It was a year of many cultural milestones, a new administration, and continued social unrest. From infamous court cases to the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, the events of 1921 reveal a world in transition. On January 21st, British crime writer Agatha Christie published her first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which introduced readers to the meticulous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot, and it marked the beginning of Agatha Christie's storied career. Also on January 21st, Charlie Chaplin released his groundbreaking silent film, The Kid, written, directed, produced, and starring Chaplin alongside child actor Jackie Coogan. The film blended comedy and drama in a way audiences had never seen before, making Chaplin a legendary pioneer of cinema. On March 4th, Warren G. Harding was sworn in as the 29th President of the United States, with Calvin Coolidge taking office as Vice President. Harding's inauguration promised a return to normalcy after the turbulence of World War I, a message that resonated with the American public, especially women who were granted the right to vote just a few months before the election. New York City played host to one of the century's greatest minds when on April 2nd, Albert Einstein lectured on his revolutionary theory of relativity. His visit attracted enormous attention and helped bring modern physics into the mainstream consciousness of America. A new fragrance was introduced on May 5th, when Coco Chanel began selling Chanel No. 5 in her Paris boutique. The date was symbolic to Chanel, who considered 5 her lucky number. The perfume broke tradition by blending floral and abstract notes, becoming one of the most famous scents in the world. One of the darkest chapters in American history began on May 31st and lasted 2 days. During the Tulsa Race Massacre, white mobs attacked the prosperous black neighborhood of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, burning down homes and destroying countless businesses. The official death toll recorded was 36, but later estimates suggest it could be as high as 300. On July 11th, William Howard Taft, the former President of the United States, was sworn in as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He remains the only person in American history to serve both as President and as Chief Justice, marking a rare distinction in U.S. politics. Just a few days later, on July 14th, a Massachusetts jury convicted Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti of first-degree murder for the shooting death of 2 people at a shoe factory in Braintree. Their highly controversial trial was marked by questions of prejudice against their anarchist beliefs and Italian heritage, and it became one of the most infamous legal cases of the 20th century. On July 29th, across the Atlantic, Adolf Hitler officially became the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party. Under his leadership, the party would grow into a mass movement that would eventually seize power in Germany. A Chicago jury on August 2nd acquitted 8 Chicago White Sox players accused of fixing the 1919 World Series. Although legally they were cleared, the players, including shoeless Joe Jackson, were banned from professional baseball for life the following day. On August 10th, Franklin D. Roosevelt, at just 39 years old, was struck with paralysis while vacationing at his summer home in Canada. Believed at the time to be polio, though later thought by some to be Guillain-Barré syndrome. The illness left him paralyzed from the waist down. Despite this, Roosevelt would go on to become America's longest-serving president. On September 8th, 16-year-old Margaret Gorman, of Washington, D.C., won the Golden Mermaid Trophy at a beauty contest in Atlantic City, New Jersey. She was later recognized as the very first Miss America, establishing a tradition that continues to this day. A scandal that rocked Hollywood began on September 10th, when comic actor Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was arrested following a party in San Francisco, where actress Virginia Rappe was fatally injured. Though Arbuckle was eventually acquitted of rape and manslaughter, the trial and bad press ended up destroying his career. On September 13th, the first White Castle restaurant opened in Wichita, Kansas. Its small, square hamburgers and standardized menu helped launch the concept of fast food, laying the foundation for a global industry. The nation paused on November 11th, Armistice Day, when President Warren G. Harding dedicated the Tomb of the Unknowns at Arlington National Cemetery. The solemn ceremony honored an unidentified soldier who died during World War I, and it established a lasting symbol of sacrifice. Finally, on December 5th, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling that upheld picketing during labor strikes as a protected form of free speech under the First Amendment. However, the court also ruled that such actions could be limited if intimidation or obstruction occurred, setting an important precedent in labor law. By 1922, America was stepping fully into the modern age. The nation's population had climbed to 110 million, automobiles were becoming more common, and radio was beginning to change how people received news and entertainment. Around the globe, discoveries, inventions, and political shifts made 1922 a quite eventful year. On January 11th, medicine took a monumental leap when 14-year-old Leonard Thompson became the first person to receive an injection of insulin for type 1 diabetes. Before this, a diabetes diagnosis was almost always fatal. The breakthrough, discovered by Canadian scientists Frederick Banting and Charles Best, would go on to save millions of lives across the world. A week later, on January 19th, the U.S. Geological Survey issued a troubling prediction that America's oil supply would be completely depleted within 20 years. Though that science-based estimate proved to be completely wrong, it did reflect the growing awareness that natural resources were not infinite in a rapid industrializing world. On January 24th, Christian Nelson patented a sweet idea that would become a household favorite: the Eskimo Pie ice cream bar. Combining chocolate and ice cream in a convenient treat on a stick, it became the first mass-marketed ice cream bar in the U.S. On February 4th, Henry Ford made a strategic business move by purchasing the struggling Lincoln Motor Company for $8 million. The acquisition gave Ford a foothold in the luxury automobile market and helped turn Lincoln into a symbol of prestige and craftsmanship for decades to come. A day later, on February 5th, DeWitt and Lila Wallace published the first issue of Reader's Digest. Their compact magazine, filled with short, uplifting stories and condensed articles, quickly became one of the most widely read publications in the world. A scandal began on April 7th, when Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall secretly leased the federal oil reserves at Teapot Dome, Wyoming, to private oil companies. This backroom deal would explode into one of the biggest political scandals in American history, later tainting the Harding administration. A week later, on April 16th, legendary sharpshooter Annie Oakley proved her aim was still unmatched by breaking 100 clay targets in a row, setting a new women's shooting record, and she did it at the age of 62. On May 23rd, a young Kansas City animator named Walt Disney incorporated his first film company, Laugh-O-Gram Films. Though the studio would go bankrupt, the experience gave Disney the foundation for what would later become a global entertainment empire. On May 30th, former President and current Chief Justice William Howard Taft dedicated the Lincoln Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Thousands gathered as the massive marble statue of Abraham Lincoln was revealed, symbolizing unity and freedom in a changing America. History was made on June 14th, when President Harding became the first U.S. president to address the nation over the radio. The new medium connected citizens across the country in real time, ushering in a new era of political communication. Then on June 24th, the American Professional Football Association officially changed its name to the National Football League, the NFL. The move marked the beginning of what would become one of the most popular sports organizations in the world. Just days later, on June 27th, the American Library Association awarded the very first Newbery Medal for Excellence in Children's Literature. The inaugural winner was The Story of Mankind by Hendrik Willem van Loon, and the award helped elevate the importance of children's books in American culture. On July 2nd, 18-year-old Ralph Samuelson made history on Lake Pepin in Minnesota by becoming the first person to successfully water ski. Using boards of his own design and a clothesline as a tow rope, Samuelson launched a sport that would soon become a summer pastime across America. On August 2nd, Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, passed away at the age of 75. To honor him, every telephone in North America reportedly went silent for 1 full minute during his funeral. Retail history was made on October 14th, when the first Tom McCann shoe store opened its doors on 3rd Avenue in New York City. The affordable, stylish footwear brand would go on to expand nationwide. One of archaeology's greatest discoveries occurred on November 4th, when British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered a step leading to the sealed tomb of King Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Later that month, on November 26th, Carter broke through the final seal and found the tomb almost completely intact, sparking worldwide fascination with ancient Egypt. On December 10th, the Canton Bulldogs defeated the Toledo Maroons 19-0 to become the first official champions of the newly renamed National Football League. The Bulldogs finished the season undefeated, dominating their opponents and helping legitimize professional football in America. Just 3 days later, on December 13th, Brooklyn Dodgers owner Charles Ebbets proposed that players wear numbers on their sleeves or caps to make them easier to identify during games, a simple but revolutionary idea that changed sports forever. Finally, on December 30th, history shifted on a global scale when the creation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, was formally proclaimed in Moscow. The new union brought together Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Transcaucasian republics under one flag, marking the birth of a communist superpower that would go on to shape the rest of the century. As we entered the year 1923, the United States was moving full speed into the Roaring '20s. The population had grown to 114 million, and the nation was buzzing with innovation, entertainment, and cultural change. But even in a decade defined by progress, tragedy, and transformation, the American story was still being written. These are the events of 1923. The year began violently when on January 2nd, a mob of Ku Klux Klan members descended on the black community of Rosewood, Florida. The town was destroyed and 8 people were killed in what became known as the Rosewood Massacre. Just over a week later, on January 10th, President Warren G. Harding ordered the remaining U.S. occupation troops in Germany to return home, formally ending America's post-World War I military presence. On March 3rd, Time magazine released its very first issue, featuring former Speaker of the House Joseph G. Cannon on the cover. The publication quickly became one of the most influential voices in journalism. Days later, on March 5th, Montana and Nevada became the first states to enact old age pension laws, a progressive step that foreshadowed the eventual creation of Social Security. March 14th saw President Harding make history as the first sitting U.S. president to file and pay income taxes, setting an example of civic duty and financial transparency. On April 4th, the Warner Brothers, Jack, Harry, Sam, and Albert, officially incorporated Warner Brothers Pictures in Burbank, California, laying the foundation for one of Hollywood's most enduring studios. The very next day, April 5th, Firestone Tire and Rubber Company began producing inflatable tires, a major improvement over the solid rubber tires that had dominated the early automobile era. Just a few weeks later, on April 18th, more than 74,000 fans packed Yankee Stadium for its grand opening. The new ballpark would soon become known as the House That Ruth Built. On May 28th, the U.S. Attorney General made a cultural statement by declaring it legal for women to wear trousers in public. It was a small but meaningful step toward greater social freedom. On June 14th, a folk tune titled "Little Old Log Cabin in the Lane" was recorded. It became one of the first major hits in country music and helped shape the sound of early Americana. Then on June 27th, Army Air Service pilots Captain Lowell Smith and Lieutenant John Richter made aviation history by completing the world's first aerial refueling in midair, a feat that would forever change long-distance flight. A new landmark was dedicated in Los Angeles on July 13th, the Hollywoodland sign. Originally created to advertise a real estate development, it would go on to become the ultimate symbol of the movie industry. On August 2nd, President Warren G. Harding died suddenly from a heart attack during the evening hours while he was staying in San Francisco. The next day, Vice President Calvin Coolidge was sworn in as the 30th President of the United States. Tragedy struck on September 8th, when 7 U.S. Navy destroyers ran aground off the California coast during the Honda Point disaster, the largest peacetime loss of Navy ships in American history. Then on October 16th, brothers Walt and Roy Disney founded the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio in California. It was the humble beginning of what would become the most powerful entertainment company in the world. Just a week later, on October 23rd, inventor Sebastian Hinton received a patent for his monkey bars, giving generations of children a new favorite playground activity. On November 20th, another inventor named Garrett Morgan patented his improved traffic signal design, introducing the yellow caution light between stop and go. His idea made roads safer across the world. Finally, on December 24th, President Calvin Coolidge pressed a button and lit the first national Christmas tree on the White House lawn. The ceremony became an enduring holiday tradition for the nation. The year 1924 was one of remarkable transition. With a population of 115 million, the U.S. continued a spirit of innovation, while entertainment was sweeping across the country. Great empires continued to fade, while powerful new ones were taking root. The modern age of media, politics, and invention made up the year 1924. On January 10th, the small film company Cohn Brandt Cohn officially reorganized as Columbia Pictures Corporation. What began as a modest operation would grow into one of Hollywood's most powerful and long-lasting movie studios. Less than 2 weeks later, on January 21st, the world learned that Vladimir Lenin, the revolutionary architect of Soviet Russia, had died of a brain hemorrhage at the age of 54, an event that would shape the future of global politics for decades. On January 25th, the first ever Winter Olympics opened in Chamonix, France. With events like ski jumping, figure skating, and bobsledding, the Games captivated audiences and made the Winter Olympics a global tradition. February 3rd marked the passing of former President Woodrow Wilson, who had had health problems since a near-fatal stroke in 1919. Wilson led the nation through World War I, helped shape the League of Nations, and won the Nobel Peace Prize. Just 5 days later, on February 8th, Ji Jian, a Chinese national and convicted murderer, became the first person executed by the gas chamber in the United States. The execution was carried out at Nevada State Prison, beginning a new and controversial method of capital punishment. Then, on February 14th, the International Business Machines Corporation, better known as IBM, was founded in New York. It would go on to revolutionize the computing and technology industries for generations. March 4th saw the publication of the song Happy Birthday to You by the Clayton F. Summy Company. The simple tune, based on an earlier song called Good Morning to All, would go on to become the most recognized song in the world. Tragedy struck on March 8th, when the Castle Gate mine disaster in Utah claimed the lives of 172 coal miners. The disaster was caused by gas explosions, set off by the miners themselves trying to relight their lamps after they were blown out. And on April 16th, a new entertainment powerhouse emerged as Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. MGM was officially formed from the merger of 3 studios. The lion's roar would soon become one of the most iconic sounds in studio history. May 10th saw the appointment of J. Edgar Hoover as head of the Bureau of Investigation, later renamed the FBI. His leadership, lasting nearly half a century, would make him one of the most powerful and controversial figures in American law enforcement. Just days later, on May 21st, Chicago was stunned when college students Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb kidnapped and murdered 14-year-old Bobby Franks in what they called the perfect crime. They planned everything for 7 months, but evidence still led to their arrest, confession, and conviction. Their arrogance ended with life sentences, plus 99 years. Then, on May 26th, Congress passed the Asian Exclusion Act, banning nearly all Asian immigration to the United States. The law deeply strained relations with Japan, and is often seen as an early factor contributing to the tensions that led to World War II. Beginning on June 24th, the Democratic National Convention began and became the longest in U.S. history, taking an astonishing 103 ballots before nominating John W. Davis for president on July 9th. Davis would go on to challenge President Calvin Coolidge in the fall election. On August 5th, Little Orphan Annie debuted in the New York Daily News. The red-haired comic strip heroine and her dog Sandy quickly became beloved symbols of optimism during the coming Depression years. On October 9th, Chicago celebrated the grand opening of Grant Park Stadium. The next year, it would be renamed Soldier Field, which would become the home of the Chicago Bears and one of America's most storied sports venues. November 1st was when the Boston Bruins officially joined the NHL, becoming the first American-based team to join the league. a major step in hockey's expansion across the U.S. The November 4th presidential election saw Republican Calvin Coolidge easily defeat Democrat John W. Davis. It was also a landmark day for women in politics, as Nellie Taylor Ross of Wyoming and Ma Ferguson of Texas became America's first female governors. Later that month, on November 27th, New York City hosted the very first Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, then called the Macy's Christmas Parade. It quickly became an annual holiday tradition. Finally, on December 26th, a 2.5-year-old Frances Gumm, who would later become Judy Garland, made her stage debut with her sisters at her father's theater in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Few could have guessed the stardom that awaited her in the decades to come. By 1925, the Roaring Twenties were in full swing, and the population of the United States was nearing 116 million people. Jazz was king, with radios crackling in homes, and America was in a truly modern age. But the culture often clashed with controversy as the year 1925 unfolded. Beginning on January 5th in Brooklyn, New York, Celia Cooney, soon to be known as the Bobbed Hair Bandit, and her husband Ed embarked on an armed robbery spree while she was pregnant. Their wild run across the city captured headlines until they were finally arrested in Florida on April 21st. The very first issue of The New Yorker magazine was published on February 21st, introducing readers to a sharp, witty, and distinctly urban style of humor and commentary that would go on to define sophisticated American journalism. On March 4th, President Calvin Coolidge made history as his inauguration became the first to be broadcast live on the radio. Across the country, Americans listened in as he and Vice President Charles Dawes were sworn in. March 18th saw the devastating tri-state tornado tear through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killing 695 people and injuring over 2,000 more. Stretching 235 miles, it remains the deadliest single tornado in U.S. history. On April 7th, Yankees great Babe Ruth collapsed in Asheville, North Carolina at the train station due to a bleeding ulcer. He ultimately would spend 7 weeks in the hospital, and he returned to the Yankees lineup that June. On April 10th, F. Scott Fitzgerald released The Great Gatsby. The novel, filled with glamour, heartbreak, and moral decay, would not find true fame until years later, eventually becoming one of America's defining literary works. The Chrysler Corporation was officially founded on June 6th by automobile pioneer Walter P. Chrysler, marking the birth of another major player in the growing American auto industry. June 13th was the day that inventor Charles Jenkins demonstrated synchronized pictures and sound, which was an early step toward what would become modern television. On July 4th, tragedy struck in Boston when the Pickwick Club hosted a July 4th dance. The floors above the dance floor caved in as they danced the Charleston, killing 44 people and injuring dozens more. Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf was published in Germany on July 18th, outlining his extremist ideology and political goals. Few realized at the time that this book would foreshadow the horrors to come. On July 21st, the famous Scopes monkey trial ended in Dayton, Tennessee. Schoolteacher John T. Scopes was found guilty of teaching evolution, violating state law. They fined him $100, and the trial ignited a national debate between science and religion that echoed for decades. On August 8th, nearly 40,000 members of the Ku Klux Klan marched through Washington, D.C. in full regalia. Their massive demonstration was meant to show power and influence during the height of their resurgence. The Phantom of the Opera premiered on September 6th at the Astor Theater in New York City, starring Lon Chaney as the disfigured Phantom. The silent horror classic became a cinematic milestone and cements Chaney's legend as the Man of a Thousand Faces. On October 1st, Mount Rushmore was formally dedicated as a national memorial. Although carving had not begun, they held a flag ceremony on that day, and it marked the beginning of one of America's most recognizable monuments. On November 28th, a new kind of radio show debuted on Nashville's WSM station, the WSM Barn Dance. It would soon be renamed the Grand Ole Opry, and go on to become the longest-running radio program in American history. On December 12th, travelers on California's Central Coast got their first taste of modern road life when the world's first motel, the Milestone Motel, opened in San Luis Obispo. And finally, on December 15th, New York's Madison Square Garden officially opened with a hockey match between the New York Americans and the Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens won 3-1 before a crowd of 17,000 as the Garden began its long reign as one of the world's most famous arenas. The year 1926 was another year of growth, with the U.S. population topping 117 million people. It was a year of invention, while at the same time being filled with mystery. New cultural legends came onto the scene, while America found itself continually evolving. These are the events of the year 1926. On January 12th, the two-man comedy series Sam and Henry made its debut on Chicago's WGN radio station. Within 2 years, it would be reborn as Amos and Andy, one of the most popular radio shows in American history. February 8th brought a major step forward in animation history when the Disney Brothers cartoon studio officially became Walt Disney Studios. The name change was intended to tie the company directly to Walt's creative vision, and his brother Roy agreed it was the right decision. Then, on March 16th, American physicist Robert H. Goddard launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket from a snowy field in Auburn, Massachusetts. Though it only rose 41 feet, it marked the dawn of modern rocketry and opened the door to potential space exploration. On May 1st, change was in the air for American workers when Ford Motor Company instituted a 5-day, 40-hour work week in its factories. This was a revolutionary move that helped define modern working schedules, and it made everyone look forward to the weekend. Just days later, on May 5th, author Sinclair Lewis declined the Pulitzer Prize for his novel Aerosmith, saying that literary awards should not come from a school of critics. A famed Pentecostal evangelist named Amy Semple McPherson vanished on May 18th from Venice Beach, California, sparking a nationwide manhunt and weeks of sensational headlines. Presumed dead, a memorial service was even held, and then on June 23rd, she reappeared in a Mexican border town with a story of kidnapping that many believed was a publicity stunt. That same month, on May 19th, RCA founded the National Broadcasting Company, better known as NBC, marking the birth of one of America's largest broadcasting networks. A star was born on June 1st in Los Angeles, a baby named Norma Jean Mortensen. Later, she would be known better as Marilyn Monroe, one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. June 23rd was the beginning of standardized entrance testing for colleges, when the College Board administered the very first SAT exam to 8,000 students. The Scholastic Aptitude Test, which was based on the U.S. Army's IQ test, would go on to shape college admissions for generations. On August 5th, magician Harry Houdini spent 90 minutes sealed in an underwater coffin before escaping, one of his final shows of strength before his untimely death a couple months later. On August 23rd, millions of people mourn the death of silent film star Rudolph Valentino, who died from an infection caused by ulcers. His sudden passing caused mass hysteria among fans, and more than 100,000 people lined the streets of Manhattan during his New York funeral. On September 18th, at 2 in the morning, the Great Miami Hurricane slammed into Florida, killing more than 370 people and causing catastrophic damage that would take years to rebuild. The Category 4 storm crossed the Florida peninsula and then entered the Gulf of Mexico before making a second landfall near Pensacola. October 14th brought us the world of Winnie the Pooh, when A.A. Milne's story about a honey-loving bear and his friends in the 100-Acre Wood was first published. Weeks later, tragedy struck on October 31st. Famed magician Harry Houdini died from complications following a ruptured appendix. A week earlier, Houdini had been punched in the abdomen by J. Gordon Whitehead, which was suspected to have caused the injury that led to his death. Days later, on November 3rd, famed sharpshooter Annie Oakley passed away at the age of 66. Her health had been deteriorating over the last year of her life, and complications from anemia was the official cause for her death. On November 11th, the American Association of State Highway Officials approved the U.S. numbered highway system, effectively creating the legendary Route 66, which would help define the open road spirit of the American century. The year closed with one last mystery, when on December 3rd, famed British novelist Agatha Christie disappeared without a trace. Following her husband's request for a divorce, the author vanished and was nowhere to be found for 11 days. The intrigue was worthy of one of her own stories, but she turned up at a hotel spa 180 miles away, leaving many to wonder if it was a stunt to frame her husband for murder. The year 1927 was about bold firsts, record-setting achievements, and moments that pushed the nation into a new era. With a population of 119 million, America was roaring forward, and each month seemed to bring another headline that would ripple through history. These are the events of 1927. January 7th marked a basketball milestone when the Harlem Globetrotters played their very first game in Hinckley, Illinois. What began as a touring team soon became a global entertainment phenomenon, known for dazzling skill and showmanship. On February 23rd, the United States took a major step in managing the rapid growth of radio communication. The Federal Radio Commission, later renamed the FCC, began regulating radio frequencies, helping shape the future of broadcasting. March 4th saw Babe Ruth sign a 3-year contract with the New York Yankees, worth $70,000 a season. This made him the highest-paid player in baseball history at the time, and his status as the game's larger-than-life superstar was cemented. Just days later, on March 8th, Pan American Airways was incorporated. It was a modest beginning for what would become one of the most iconic and influential names in aviation for the next 60 years. April 19th saw Broadway firebrand Mae West convicted of obscenity for her provocative play, Sex. Because of this, she was sentenced to 10 days in jail and fined $500. After serving her time, she emerged even more famous, and it launched her Hollywood career. Beginning on April 22nd and lasting until May 5th, the Great Mississippi Flood devastated the American South. The flood inundated 16 million acres of land, displacing nearly 640,000 people in states from Illinois all the way down to Louisiana. It was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history at the time, reshaping communities, politics, and federal disaster response. On April 29th, construction was completed on the Spirit of St. Louis, a custom-built monoplane destined to carry a young pilot named Charles Lindbergh into the history books. A defining hotel opened in Hollywood on May 15th. The Roosevelt Hotel, which was backed by stars Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, and theater mogul Sid Grauman, soon became a glamorous gathering spot during the golden age of film. Just 3 days later, on May 18th, Sid Grauman himself opened the legendary Chinese Theater with a dazzling stage show and the premiere of Cecil B. DeMille's epic The King of Kings. The famous entrance with handprints, footprints, and signatures in cement would soon follow. That same day on May 18th, tragedy struck in Bath Township, Michigan. A disgruntled local official detonated explosives at a school, killing 45 people, most of them children, in one of the deadliest school attacks in U.S. history. On May 20th, at 7:40 a.m., Charles Lindbergh lifted off from New York in the Spirit of St. Louis, beginning the first solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic. 33 hours later, he landed triumphantly in Paris, becoming an international hero and winning the Orteig Prize, something that was worth $25,000. Just days later, on May 25th, Henry Ford announced the end of the Model T. The following day, the 15 millionth and final Model T rolled off the production line, closing a chapter in American automotive history. June 1st welcomed a symbol of international freedom when the Peace Bridge between Buffalo, New York and Fort Erie, Ontario, opened to traffic. 2 months later, it was formally dedicated to commemorate a century of peace between the United States and Canada. On June 26, summer was all about thrills when the Cyclone roller coaster opened at Coney Island. This was one of the most famous wooden roller coasters ever built, and it's still in operation nearly a century later. On July 29th, medical innovation took center stage as the first iron lung was installed at Bellevue Hospital in New York. This electric respirator offered new hope for patients who were suffering from polio. August 2nd delivered political news from the White House when President Calvin Coolidge declared, "I do not choose to run for president in 1928." Stunning the nation, and this opened the door for Herbert Hoover to run for president. On September 7th, in a small San Francisco lab, Philo Farnsworth demonstrated the first electronic television, a breakthrough that would change entertainment forever. Farnsworth is credited as being the inventor of the TV, but spent much of his career fighting RCA over his patents. September 18th brought another broadcasting milestone with the birth of the Columbia Phonographic Broadcasting System, better known as CBS, which debuted with 47 radio stations, soon becoming one of the big three media giants. On September 30th, Babe Ruth smashed his 60th home run of the season, setting a record that would stand for 34 years. On October 6th, movie history was made as The Jazz Singer premiered. It became the first major film with synchronized dialogue and sound, ushering in the era of talkies and transforming Hollywood forever. October 28th was the date that Pan American Airways made their first scheduled flight, sending a plane from Key West to Havana, Cuba, and expanding America's reach into international air travel. Winter brought innovation when on November 22nd, Carl Ellison received the first patent for a snowmobile, paving the way for new winter travel and sport across snowy landscapes. On December 2nd, the Ford Motor Company formally introduced their newest vehicle, the Model A. This replaced the legendary Model T, and it excited buyers eager for a modern automobile. Tragedy gripped the nation on December 15th, when 12-year-old Marion Parker was kidnapped in Los Angeles. Her murder days later triggered one of the largest manhunts in West Coast history. The killer, William Edward Hickman, was caught on December 22nd. He would be convicted and executed the following year. The year closed with a terrible accident on December 17th, when the U.S. Navy submarine S-4 was surfacing. It was accidentally rammed by the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Paulding off Provincetown, Massachusetts. The collision sank the submarine, and the 40 crew members on board were all lost, despite desperate rescue attempts. By 1928, America was riding high, with the population closing in on 121 million. Jazz filled the air, cities were growing, and optimism was running through the country. 1928 was another year that provided us with some unforgettable history, so here are the events that shaped the year. Beginning on January 12th, the nation was stunned when convicted murderer Ruth Snyder was executed at Sing Sing Prison in New York. A hidden camera strapped to the ankle of a journalist captured the exact moment of her electrocution, and the shocking photograph splashed across the front pages nationwide, fueling debates about crime, punishment, and the limits of sensational journalism. Just a few days later, on January 16th, President Calvin Coolidge traveled to Havana, Cuba, for the 6th Pan American Conference. It was a historic visit, with him becoming the last sitting U.S. president to visit the island until 2016. February 6th introduced us to a woman calling herself Anastasia Tchaikovsky. She arrived in New York City, claiming to be the youngest daughter of the murdered Russian Tsar Nicholas II. Speaking from aboard an ocean liner, she recounted her dramatic escape from the Bolsheviks in 1918. Her story fascinated the public and fueled rumors that one of the Romanovs might have survived. On March 12th, tragedy struck in California when the St. Francis Dam, north of Los Angeles, collapsed in the middle of the night, killing more than 400 people. Entire communities were washed away in one of the worst civil engineering disasters in U.S. history. On May 10th, General Electric's experimental station, located in Schenectady, New York, began the first regular television broadcasts, years before television would become a household staple. Later that month, on May 28th, saw Dodge Brothers Incorporated merge with the Chrysler Corporation, helping shape the future of the American automobile industry. On June 2nd, a creamy new product hit grocery shelves when Kraft introduced Velveeta cheese, calling it a nutritious and easy-to-melt food, perfect for the modern kitchen. At the Republican National Convention on June 14th, Herbert Hoover was nominated for president, setting up an election battle that would soon define the final years of the decade. Just a few days later, on June 18th, Amelia Earhart made history as the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. But on this flight, she was a passenger. It marked the beginning of her path to aviation fame that was to come later. The Democrats followed up with their nomination on June 28th. New York Governor Al Smith was nominated for president, becoming the first Catholic to receive a major party nomination. On July 7th, a small bakery in Chillicothe, Missouri, made history when it sold machine-sliced bread for the very first time. Otto Rohwedder was the man behind the innovation, making it easier for consumers to buy bread instead of baking it themselves. This led to the popular idiom, "the greatest thing since sliced bread." As hurricane season hit, September 16th brought devastation to Florida when the Okeechobee hurricane claimed more than 2,500 lives as it moved from West Palm Beach and curved north to Jacksonville, leaving a trail of damage the length of the state. Later that month, on September 21st, classrooms across America received the first issue of My Weekly Reader, a publication that would go on to inform and entertain generations of school children. Then came September 25th, when a small Chicago company called Galvin Manufacturing officially incorporated. 2 years later, they'd invent the Motorola car radio, combining motor and Victrola to bring music and news to America's highways. October 1st marked the official opening of Los Angeles International Airport, originally called Mines Field. It was a modest start for what would become one of the busiest airports in the world. On November 4th, Arnold Rothstein, the infamous crime boss and gambler tied to the 1919 World Series scandal, was shot during a business meeting. He died 2 days later. The killing was connected to a high-stakes poker game a few weeks earlier that Rothstein claimed was fixed, so he refused to pay his debt. November 6th was Election Day, and it brought a landslide victory for Herbert Hoover, who defeated Al Smith and promised a future of prosperity. This was just 1 year before the American economy would collapse. A new entertainment superstar first appeared on November 18th, when audiences watched and heard Mickey Mouse in the short film Steamboat Willie. It was Disney's first cartoon with synchronized sound, and it changed animation forever. Closing out the year, December 21st saw Congress approve the construction of the Boulder Dam, later renamed the Hoover Dam, a project that would come to symbolize American determination during difficult years ahead. "1929 wasn't just another year. It was a turning point in American history. The country started the year off strong, but beneath all the excitement, storm clouds were gathering. This was a year when fortunes were made and massively lost, with 121 million Americans standing on the edge of a historic financial collapse. These are the events of 1929. To start the year, on January 7th, newspaper readers were introduced to two future icons in the form of comic strips. Buck Rogers blasted us into the future, while Tarzan took us deep into the jungle. Their debut marked a new era of adventure storytelling that influenced entertainment for decades. January 13th brought the quiet end of an Old West legend. Wyatt Earp, once at the center of the infamous OK Corral shootout, passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 80. His real life rarely matched the Hollywood myth we know today, but it secured his name forever in Western folklore. On January 17th, another comic icon made his first appearance. This time it was Popeye the Sailor Man, who grinned his way into the Thimble Theater strip. The scrappy, spinach-loving hero would go on to become one of America's most recognizable cartoon characters. February 14th arrived with violence, as Chicago gang wars reached a brutal peak with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 members of a rival gang were lined up and executed by Al Capone's outfit, cementing his ruthless grip on the city. Just 2 days later, on February 16th, Beverly Hills was rocked by a mystery when the son of an oil tycoon named Ned Doheny and his secretary Hugh Plunkett were found dead in Greystone Mansion. Officially, it was ruled that Plunkett shot Doheny and then turned the gun on himself, but the case remained clouded by rumor and unanswered questions. Grand Teton National Park was established on February 26th. The move sparked outrage among Western ranchers, who saw it as federal overreach. But nonetheless, the breathtaking Wyoming scenery was preserved for generations of Americans. On March 4th, Herbert Hoover took the presidential oath of office. On a wave of confidence and prosperity, Charles Curtis was also sworn in as vice president, becoming the first indigenous American to hold the position. A day later, on March 5th, David Buick passed away in near obscurity from colon cancer. Though he founded the Buick Car Company, one that would help form General Motors, he had sold his stake long before and never saw the empire it became. March 27th saw a technological convenience enter the Oval Office. President Hoover oversaw the installation of the very first telephone at the president's desk. Before this, presidents had to step outside the Oval to use a phone in another room. Beginning on April 2nd, Arizona experienced an international incident when an Irish mercenary pilot accidentally dropped explosives on U.S. soil while flying for Mexican rebels. The bombing of Naco was the first foreign aerial assault on America ever. On May 15th, the Cleveland Clinic erupted into flames after a refrigerant leak ignited, killing 128 people. The tragedy became a turning point in the development of safer cooling chemicals, ultimately leading to widespread adoption of chlorofluorocarbons. May 16th became Hollywood's biggest night, as the Academy Awards were first held at the Roosevelt Hotel. The film Wings won Best Picture, with all of the awards being announced 3 months before the awards ceremony. The very next day, May 17th, authorities arrested Al Capone and his bodyguard for carrying concealed weapons in Philadelphia. Within 16 hours, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison, his first time behind bars. By June 16th, 62-year-old Otto Funk, known as the Walking Fiddler, completed one of the most astonishing feats of the decade, walking 4,165 miles from New York to San Francisco. On August 31st, international reparations took center stage as the Young Plan was finalized, reducing Germany's World War I debt burden to $26 billion and outlining a 58-year payment schedule. This was an attempt to stabilize Europe during uneasy times. October 11th marked the moment JCPenney became a truly national retailer. With the opening of store 1252 in Delaware, the chain officially claimed a presence in all 48 states, reflecting the booming consumer culture of the 1920s. As October 24th unfolded, panic hit Wall Street. Black Thursday sent the Dow plunging 12.8% in a single day, rattling investors and hinting at the economic disaster looming ahead. On October 25th, former Interior Secretary Albert Fall was convicted of bribery for his role in the Teapot Dome scandal from 1922. His imprisonment marked the first time a former cabinet official was sent to jail for crimes committed in office. Just days later, on October 29th, the stock market collapsed completely. Black Tuesday, as it was called, wiped out fortunes across the country and signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. November 7th brought us the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. The museum was the pet project of John D. Rockefeller's wife Abby, who championed the project. Artwork by Van Gogh, Cézanne, and Gauguin was on display when it first opened to the public. Lastly, on December 3rd, President Herbert Hoover addressed Congress, where he assured lawmakers that the financial panic was easing and confidence was returning. In reality, the nation had only just begun its long slide into an extensive economic crisis. In 1930, America found itself in an unusual spot. The population was bigger than ever at 123 million, yet more and more people were losing their jobs, and families faced uncertainty due to the stock market crash in 1929. But new ideas and unforgettable firsts continued to shape everyday life. These are the events that made up the year 1930. As the year began, January 6th brought us one first. British author A. A. Milne signed the first ever literary character licensing agreement, granting Stephen Schlesinger the U.S. and Canadian rights to merchandise Winnie the Pooh. On January 20th, radio listeners in Detroit heard something brand new. The very first broadcast of The Lone Ranger on WXYZ. The masked hero would gallop into American living rooms for decades to come. On February 18th, weird history took to the skies. Elm Farm Ollie became the first cow to fly in an airplane, and the first to be milked while airborne. The stunt was part of an aviation demonstration, and it definitely captured public curiosity, especially since the milk was parachuted back down to the ground. That same day, February 18th, astronomer Clyde Tombaugh confirmed the existence of Pluto while studying photographic plates taken a month earlier. Pluto would be considered the 9th planet for the rest of the century. Moving into early March, on the 6th, shoppers in Springfield, Massachusetts encountered something completely new: Birdseye frozen food. Clarence Birdseye's first commercially sold frozen products hit the shelves, setting the stage for a revolution in how Americans ate. By March 17th, construction on what would become an iconic part of the New York skyline had begun. Work officially started on the Empire State Building. a project that would rise past 100 stories and become the tallest building in the world. Just a few days later, on March 20th, Colonel Harlan Sanders opened his first restaurant in North Corbin, Kentucky. Called Sanders Courtin Cafe, it was the earliest version of what the world would later know as Kentucky Fried Chicken. On April 19th, Warner Brothers released their first animated cartoon series, Looney Tunes. The series would run until 1969 and introduce some of the most famous cartoon characters in history. Only 2 days later, on April 21st, tragedy struck in Ohio when a massive prison fire claimed 320 lives. Many inmates were unable to escape because their cells remained locked, making it one of the deadliest prison disasters in American history. On May 15th, aviation saw another first. Ellen Church took to the skies as the world's first airline stewardess, serving on a Boeing trimotor flight traveling from Oakland to Chicago. Later that month, on May 27th, a new skyscraper changed the New York City skyline. The Chrysler Building was completed, becoming the first man-made structure to surpass 1,000 feet. Just a few days after that, on May 30th, Chicago celebrated the opening of the Shedd Aquarium. As one of the earliest inland aquariums in the world, it quickly became a major attraction. On August 9th, audiences met a new animated star. Betty Boop made her debut in the cartoon Dizzy Dishes, beginning her rise as one of the most recognizable characters of the 1930s. When September 8th rolled around, inventor Richard Gurley Drew introduced Scotch tape, giving households and businesses a simple product that would become a daily necessity. Jumping forward to November 3rd, the Bank of Italy officially became the Bank of America, a name that reflected its growing national presence, serving more than just Italian Americans. A merger 2 years earlier broadened their customer base, so a new name was needed. Later that month, on November 22nd, Elijah Muhammad founded the Nation of Islam in Detroit, beginning an organization that would become an important and sometimes controversial force in American religious and political history. As the year drew to a close, on December 2nd, President Herbert Hoover addressed Congress. Facing mounting economic turmoil, he requested a $150 million public works program to create jobs and stimulate the struggling economy. And finally, on December 29th, swimmer Fred Newton reached a remarkable milestone. After 176 days and 742 hours in the water, he became the first person to swim the entire length of the Mississippi River, 1,826 miles from Minnesota to New Orleans. Recollection Road and LEGACYBOX both believe it's important to preserve the past. If you're like me, there's a box of your family's treasured home movies and photos tucked away somewhere, and LEGACYBOX can help you preserve them digitally. The process is a simple and safe solution for converting your home movies and photos to thumb drive or to the cloud. Just send in your LEGACYBOX filled with old VHS and camcorder tapes, film reels, and pictures, and get back digital copies that can be easily enjoyed, shared, and kept organized. It's that easy. LEGACYBOX is trusted by over 1 million people, and it's all done right here in the USA. Get started preserving your past today. Go to legacybox.com/recollection to get an incredible 55% off. Buy today to take advantage of this exclusive offer and send in your memories when you're ready. Go to legacybox.com/recollection to save 55% while supplies last. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to check the description of this video for links to pick up a t-shirt and sign up for the newsletter. Also, don't forget to visit our friends at Horn and Hard Art to save 10% on your next order. Visit hornandhardart.com/recollection. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club.